This video will be about the barrier building bishop, or in other words, it will be about the ability of the bishop to create a barrier. Having knowledge over these patterns is quite helpful, especially when it comes to spotting tactical opportunities. We can just take this position as an example. Material-wise, it is equal, but white has a winning tactic. If you want to spot it on your own, you can stop the video now, or if you want to see the solution, you can just keep watching. The winning move is rook h7, threatening checkmate. And interestingly enough, the king has no option to escape that threat because of the barrier that is built on the 7th rank by the king in combination with the bishop. If black's king tries to run, for example to c8, then rook h8 would still be mate because b7 is controlled by white's bishop. So running away with the king doesn't work because of the length of the barrier that was established by white. So if moving the king to security is no option, it's an idea for black to break the barrier immediately, saying that if there is no barrier, there is no mate. But this doesn't work either. The barrier building white king cannot be attacked at all, there is no check available. Neither the bishop nor the rook can give check. Black could try to eliminate the bishop and shorten the barrier from initially 5 squares to 3 squares. But in this case, that is not enough. Rook h8 would still be checkmate. Black could only prolong this match for one more move with bishop g8 to defend against the check, but after rook takes on g8, it's checkmate. The usefulness of this barrier can also be seen in this puzzle. This is a rook versus rook and bishop endgame. Generally a theoretical draw, but this position, however, is one for black, if the correct move is seen. If you want to look for the move on your own, you can pause the video now, or if you want to see the solution, you can just keep watching. The winning move in this position is king d3, again threatening the long barrier of 5 squares and threatening checkmate. And again, like in the previous example, the king cannot escape because the barrier is simply too long. King e1, rook a1, checkmate. So running away from the checkmate doesn't work. The idea to break the barrier to defend against checkmate doesn't work either. Rook f3 check, bishop e3. Now the barrier is indeed shortened by 1 square, but the bishop still controls f2 and additionally c1. And now the king cannot escape by c1, and trying to run to e1 is not quick enough. It's checkmate next. If the rook gives itself up for the bishop, black is up a rook and of course completely winning. So in short, in some situations it's quite useful to be aware of the lineup of bishop and king to create the long barrier of 5 squares. Another way to create a barrier with the help of the bishop is demonstrated in this puzzle. In contrast to the two previous puzzles, I composed this myself, which is probably quite obvious because it's a very simple one, but I think it illustrates the idea to use a built barrier quite well. So in this position it's white to move and to win. There are actually 2 moves that win while everything else loses. You can stop the video now if you want to solve it on your own, or you can just keep watching if you want to hear the solution immediately. If we look at this position, it becomes apparent that a barrier is built by knight and bishop, which cuts off black's king. So if white's rook would somehow be able to get to the back rank, it would be able to deliver checkmate. And the way to make this happen is via rook a1 or rook b1. After one of these 2 moves is played, it's over. Checkmate cannot be stopped. Black's queen and knight are not participating in the defense and the black king cannot escape. b7 and b8 are controlled by knight and bishop, and king d8 allows the checkmate because the barrier formed by bishop and knight is not letting him escape. If the knight on c5 would be replaced by a pawn on c6, or a bishop on c6, a similar barrier would be established. Of course, with the bishop on c6, the grip on the position would even be stronger as 2 bishops completely cage in black's king. Another interesting barrier can be built with the help of an opponent's pawn. I first have seen this idea in the book Weapons of Chess from Bruce Pandolfini. In his chapter about blockading a passed pawn, he explains that the rook is the bad blockader because his activity is severely limited if it blockades a pawn, while the knight is known to be the best blockader because it can blockade the pawn and still stay very active and control many squares. The bishop is considered to be a good blockader. It can blockade the passed pawn and still stay quite active. An interesting advantage that the bishop as a blockader has is that it is able to build a little barrier in cooperation with an opponent's pawn. Let's for an example look at this position. The bishop builds together with the opponent's pawn a barrier that is 3 squares long. If black's king on e5 wants to help his pawn to promote, the king has first of all to move to d4, c4, d3, and only now white would have to react. If we would imagine that the blockader would be a knight or a rook, then the king on e5 could immediately enter on d4 because there is no barrier that stops him. So in the endgame, the barrier can be used to make the opponent spend additional moves, and generally it can sometimes play an important role in securing a checkmate, as can be seen in this position. White can now play rook a8, checkmate. So far in this video I was focused on horizontal barriers, but also diagonal barriers can be built. I would say that in contrast to horizontal barriers, diagonal barriers are less often relevant in a practical game because it is more difficult to threaten the king with a diagonal barrier. One famous example is the two-bishop checkmate. In this case, the two bishops are used to establish barriers that cannot be crossed by the opponent's king, and slowly but steady the barriers will be tightened and checkmate will be delivered. Another example is a so-called knight corral. In these positions, the bishop builds a barrier that the knight cannot cross. In this example, the knight is trapped and cannot free itself on its own. Every possible square where the knight can move to is firmly controlled by the bishop. In a practical position, it could look like that. If the knight would somehow be able to give itself up for the pawn, the resulting position would be a draw. But in this position, the knight is trapped and needs the support of its king to free itself, but black's king is too far away to help in time. White's king can now move closer to the knight, for an example with king d6. The knight cannot move, so black has to play a king move. King b6, king e6, king c5, king f5, king d5, and now not going to g5 immediately. That would hang the bishop and result in a draw, but simply maintain control of the a1 h8 diagonal, with, for an example, bishop a1. Because now white's king is so close that the bishop's control of f4 is not needed anymore. f4 is covered by the king and g3 by the pawn, so with a little bit of team effort the knight keeps being trapped with nowhere to run. King d6, king g5, and now the knight falls thanks to the idea of trapping it with the bishop. These were some of the basic barrier building patterns of the bishops that I came across in my chess life. As a summary, I will now let a compilation of these patterns play in the background. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. Bye.